In every family, there is a black sheep, sometimes a very apt description of the state of affairs. At least it perfectly suits the description of today's story. Judy Anderson did not go to work in the early morning hours of December 26, 2007. She worked with a friend named Linda at the post office. The two women had known each other for years, maintained good contact, and visited each other on weekends. Judy was known as a very responsible employee who never missed a shift without good reason or prior notice. But this day was significantly different from the others. So Linda apologized to management and drove to the Anderson family's house at 9 a.m. to see if everything was all right. She entered the house without realizing she was in mortal danger. Coincidentally, however, no one was there at that time. Upon arriving at the Anderson family home, Linda found that the couple's cars were present, but the house looked empty. No lights were on in the house, and it was too quiet. When the woman went to the front door, she couldn't get in and rang the doorbell. Receiving no answer, she knocked a little harder on the door. At that moment, Linda noticed that the Andersons' house was unlocked. This seemed strange to her as it looked empty from the outside. As she entered the house, she immediately smelled a strange, unpleasant odor. Linda called out for the family, but no one answered. As she walked past the fireplace on the ground floor, the woman saw something suspicious downstairs. As she descended into the darkness, she saw a man lying on the floor and thought he had carbon monoxide poisoning. She wanted to try to pull him upstairs, but as she approached him from the side, she was startled when she saw another body in the darkness of the basement right behind her. She did not have her cell phone with her. Appalled, Linda dialed emergency services from the house phone. She reported that she had found 3 human bodies in the Andersons' house. Police officers arrived at the farm around 9:30 a.m. Apparently, the scale of the tragedy was much greater than Linda had imagined. Scott, his wife, and 2 small children were found in the basement of the house. They had all been killed by gunshots to the head and carelessly piled together. The bodies of the elder Andersons, Judy and Wayne, lay in a barn where the murderers had placed them after the cold-blooded execution. The town of Carnation in Washington state, where this madness unfolded, was considered a quiet, peaceful place. Apart from occasional burglaries, nothing ever happened here, except on this fateful day when one of the worst murders in the state's history occurred in Carnation, spoiling the Christmas spirit. While forensic officers worked on the farm around 11 a.m., the daughter of the murdered Judy and Wayne, Michele, and her boyfriend Joseph arrived and tried to go to their trailer. Naturally, the police officers wanted to speak with them. From the outset, investigators noticed the strange behavior of the young people. Although the crime scene was already cordoned off, something clearly frightening had happened here. Everything was taped off, but neither Michele nor Joseph asked why this was happening at their parents' farm or why the police were there. They asked no questions about their relatives, as if everything that was going on there was indifferent to them. Naturally, this was strange. Given the suspicious behavior of 29-year-olds Michele and Joseph, they decided to apprehend them and question them separately at the station. Michele behaved very confidently and even defiantly from the start. She said that she and Joseph were going to fly to Vegas on December 24 to get married. So both were not in the house at the alleged time of the crime, and they said they had no idea what had happened during that time. However, there were no rings on the lovers' hands nor a marriage certificate. Michele then justified that they had gotten lost on the way and never reached Las Vegas, so they decided to return, and when they arrived home, they found the police officers. Joseph seemed to be the weak link from the start. Nervously, after a few minutes of interrogation, he confessed to killing the family. He seemed genuinely remorseful. Joseph cried and called himself a monster. The police managed to break Michele a little later. She also confessed to murdering her family members. The young people agreed to cooperate with the investigation. First and foremost, the investigators expected to obtain the murder weapon. The couple led law enforcement officials to the location where they had hidden 2 pistols. They submerged the evidence in a river near the town. As the couple led the investigators and showed them the exact location, special services began their work. Thanks to a search team of divers, the valuable evidence was recovered from the bottom of the pond and taken to a lab. Ballistic examinations confirmed that these were the weapons used to shoot 6 people who collectively suffered multiple injuries. So what happened to the family, and what was the reason for using the pistols? 60-year-old Wayne was an engineer at the Boeing company. He was born into a good family and spent his younger years on his parents' farm. Wayne was an active and determined man. He strived for a good education and a career, and his dreams began to come true quite quickly. He built a private life. His first relationship was unsuccessful, and the couple quickly separated. Then he met Judy, whom he later called his better half. With her, he succeeded in building a wonderful family that both were rightly proud of. By 2007, the couple had been married for 31 years and lived secluded on their farm. 61-year-old Judy Anderson was focused on family from the start. She dreamed of children and a happy marriage, and Wayne was her opportunity to fulfill all of that. The family home was in the small town of Carnation, just outside Seattle. It was a close-knit community where everyone knew the Anderson family well, maintained friendships, and regularly met with neighbors for joint barbecues. The holiday weekend in December 2007 was to be no exception. The Anderson couple had 3 children in their 30 years together: Mary, Scott, and Michele. The eldest daughter, Mary, lived at the time in the neighboring town of North Bend. She had moved away from her family and had been living alone for several years to build a career. In her private life, success was more modest. She was sick over the holidays and wanted to visit her family another time when she was well again. Scott was 32 years old at the time of the tragic events. He had a 30-year-old wife, Erica. He devoted a lot of attention to his career, but his private life was also in order. The couple already had children, 5-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old Nathan. The young man lived in another neighboring town, about a half-hour drive from the elder Anderson's house. He was a devoted family man and a loving husband. He worked as a construction worker while Erica took care of the household and the little ones as a housewife. Michele Anderson was 29 years old. From the moment she was born, she stood out among the couple's other children, mostly not for the good. Even during her school years, she was known as a quarrelsome, contentious child. She could not achieve professional success. Among the Andersons' neighbors and friends, the rumor circulated that Michele was a problematic family member. However, her siblings supported her until the end, forgiving her difficult character, and the parents continued to hope that Michele would come to her senses and sooner or later reveal her talents. Michele was in a relationship several times but without success. Her last boyfriend was 29-year-old Joseph McEnroe. The couple spent about 5 years together. The relationship was quite complicated, but Michele had not had a longer relationship. Michele and Joseph met on an online dating website and quickly began to build a relationship, initially a long-distance one. Then the lovers moved in together and began living together. The attempt to rent an apartment was unsuccessful. They had no special training, so they had difficulties with work and money. In 2004, they rented a mobile home, as that was the only way Michele and Joseph could afford the rent, at least initially. Neighbors who knew them quite well described the couple as outsiders and very lazy. They rarely left their trailer and avoided eye contact with people and social contacts. Even fleeting dialogue seemed to make them uncomfortable. The slightest misunderstanding, e.g., a car parked incorrectly in front of the trailer, would provoke Michele's anger. She would immediately run out to argue and shout as if she had only been waiting for such an opportunity to assert herself. But there were also a few pronounced oddities. Several people reported that they observed Michele during her aggressive outbursts when she would rage without apparent reason and then suddenly calm down. Such behavior was alarming. She was even advised to see a psychiatrist. At almost every meeting with strangers, Michele brought up the topic of money. As a rule, she invented stories that she and her family had a lot of money, but for some reason weren't using it. In reality, both looked unkempt. Many people described the couple as unkempt, indifferent people. They walked around in dirty clothes and didn't care about themselves, so they were usually avoided. Michele had a firm grip on Joseph. She completely subjugated him and even answered questions for him herself. She called herself the White Crow in her family, emphasizing that despite her marginality, she was too good for the rest of the Andersons. Of course, such behavior could not be good for the warm relationships in the family, and so conflicts repeatedly arose. If Michele wasn't inventing stories about the Andersons' money, she was telling how badly her parents treated her. She liked to describe in detail how her father beat her from a young age and her mother was a hypocritical tyrant. It was unbearable to live with them, so she moved out and lived her own life. That's how Joseph and Michele ended up in the trailer. Despite the tensions in the family, neighbors repeatedly saw Judy visit her daughter once a month. Each time she brought full bags of groceries to support her daughter. The woman behaved politely and calmly, was friendly, and did not confirm Michele's statements about abuse in any way. In return, her daughter was always rude and would yell at her mother despite her kindness and care. One of the couple's friends described the mobile home as an unpleasant place, more for survival than for a fulfilling life. The trailer was in a depressing state. It was very sparsely furnished and most appliances were broken. Several windows were broken and taped up. The tenants had used improvised tinting. Everything was covered with a foil material that let almost no light through. Michele admitted that the windows were covered with such foil for a specific reason. It prevented outsiders from looking into the dwelling. When asked for the reason for this measure, she replied that the neighbors were spying on them. According to Michele, there were even several attempts to break into the trailer when the couple was not there. She filed a report with the police, but despite several surveillance cameras near their trailer, nothing could be found. The neighbors doubted that anyone had broken into the trailer, as there was hardly anything there. It seemed that Michele had made it all up and was trying to draw attention to herself in this way. The relationship with Joseph seemed rather strange. Michele sincerely considered herself his spiritual guide. Judging by her words, she would show him how to live correctly. Not many people believed that. Apparently, she didn't have enough knowledge, and so the trouble began. First, Michele lost her job, then Joseph suffered a similar fate. After a few overdue lease payments for the property, the trailer had to move. There was no money for a full-time apartment, and the couple was forced to move back to the Anderson farm where their parents lived. Michele and Joseph moved and parked the trailer on their parents' farm property, who did not refuse and took the couple in. For Christmas Eve, December 24, 2007, the Anderson family planned a celebration with their loved ones. The parents, 61-year-old Judy and 60-year-old Wayne, decided to gather everyone together. Scott, along with his wife and their two small children, set off for the family home. Only the eldest daughter, Mary, could not be there. While everyone waited for the guests to arrive, Joseph and Michele remained in their trailer. There was probably another conflict, causing the parents and daughter with her boyfriend to get into an argument. Suddenly, around 4 p.m., they emerged from the trailer, both armed with pistols. Judy was busy wrapping Christmas presents in the backyard and preparing for the guests' arrival. Joseph distracted her with conversation while Michele slowly approached from behind, gun in hand. All of this was noticed by Wayne, who was reading the newspaper inside the house. The man tried to intervene. Michele noticed his attempt and shot at her father but missed him, dropping the weapon. Joseph then picked up the weapon and shot the man once in the head. Wayne was dead on the spot. Judy was then shot 3 times. The perpetrators seized the moment, picked up the bodies, and dragged them into a shed behind the house before the noise attracted the attention of the neighbors, who were quite far from the farm. The murderers then removed the blood and cleaned the crime scene. They had less than an hour before their brother and his family arrived. Around 5 p.m., Scott, Erica, and their children, Nathan and Olivia, arrived at their parents' house as arranged. They were ready to celebrate Christmas and were a little surprised when Judy and Wayne did not greet them. This was completely out of character for the caring and responsible parents who were looking forward to their grandchildren. Michele reassured the guests, telling them that her mother and father had gone grocery shopping and would be back soon. Unsuspectingly, the family entered the living room. They did not even notice that their parents' cars were parked outside the house. There, Joseph confronted them. As soon as 32-year-old brother Scott sat down on the couch, Michele took a pistol and shot him several times in the head, killing him instantly. The murderer's next target was 30-year-old Erica, but she still had time to react and fled with the children. The bloodthirsty couple missed several shots and then ran out of ammunition. While Michele and Joseph reloaded their weapons, the young woman managed to lock herself in a room with a landline phone. At 5:13 p.m., she dialed emergency services 911. Unfortunately, Erica did not have time to speak to the dispatcher because Joseph burst into the room just as she reached emergency services. Erica pleaded with him not to kill the children, but the madman shot her in the head. He grabbed the phone and smashed it against the wall. All of this happened before the eyes of the terrified children who clung to the body of their shot mother. 5-year-old Olivia was the next to die. 3-year-old Nathan did not understand what was happening. He picked up the batteries that had fallen out of the broken phone from the floor and offered them to Joseph. Thereupon, he shot the naive child in the face. Erica managed to reach emergency services. Her death scream seemed to have been recorded, and a police patrol was dispatched to investigate. Soon after, a vehicle with police officers drove up to the Andersons' house. They were met by Michele, who defiantly locked the gate in front of the officers' eyes. Reluctantly, she spoke with the patrol officers, saying everything was fine and refusing to let them into the house. Access to the house could not be granted, so the police officers had to leave the house. After the couple had been arrested, Michele, in an attempt to justify her bloodthirsty deed, explained that she was angry with her parents and her brother. Scott, she said, owed her a large sum of money and did not want to pay it back. This was due to her repeatedly lending her brother $3,500 over several years. Gradually, a debt of $4,000 had accumulated. She sought an amicable solution with him, but he persistently ignored her demands to repay the debt. When Michele asked her parents for support in this dispute, they simply ignored her, for which reason she harbored a grudge. Michele also stated that she had been physically and emotionally abused by her father for years, and her mother began to pressure her to pay rent shortly before the murder. Michele was outraged. She did not want to pay her parents for her trailer being parked on their farm property. But no one believed her word. All acquaintances of the couple knew that Joseph and Michele had no money to lend their brother, who earned well and did not need loans, $3,000 to $5,000 each. The existence of a $4,000 debt seemed highly questionable. Nor did anyone believe that the parents, who knew of the couple's financial problems, would have demanded rent from them. The Anderson couple was very hospitable. They welcomed their daughter and her boyfriend, helped them with grocery shopping, and never asked for money. Feeling that no one believed her, 29-year-old Michele suddenly began to change her statement. Each time, the perpetrator tried to portray herself as the victim. The final version of the motive for the shooting of 6 people was that she was jealous of her brother's success, of the way he had relationships in the family and at work. She was jealous of her parents, but that did not explain the killing of the small children who barely knew what was going on and were not to blame for the couple being so lazy. Michele said it was an act of mercy on her part. She realized that her nephews would grow up in a cruel world where both parents would be taken from them from an early age, and she did not want to subject the little ones to that. Furthermore, she was annoyed by the crying of the children in front of whose eyes their parents were shot. In interviews, Michele readily recounted how she was humiliated and oppressed by her parents, inventing ever new stories, each more creative than the last. Even the perpetrator's confession on tape lasted more than 2 hours, in which they described in detail who shot whom in what order. On December 28, 2007, Michele Anderson and Joseph McEnroe were charged with 6 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. The trial dragged on. After 10 months in October 2008, the prosecution decided to seek the death penalty for both perpetrators, which was in force in that state at the time. Given the cold-blooded massacre of adults and young children, it seemed inevitable that the jury would favor the death penalty for both. However, the governor of Washington state rejected it. Behind the high-profile rhetoric and national attention, Michele expressed her desire to be executed in another interview. She claimed that she was suffering terrible torment and considered the rest of her days behind bars a far more cruel punishment than lethal injection. Despite her wish, the death penalty was not considered. Following the hearings, both criminals were sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences without parole. After the change of governor, the question of the death penalty for the couple was revisited. On September 5, 2013, the Washington State Supreme Court overturned the court's decision. Now a new trial was pending. Michele was so frightened that she immediately announced she was retracting all her previous statements about her desire for the death penalty. In January 2015, Joseph McEnroe appeared in court. His defense claimed their client was forced into the act by Michele. According to the lawyers, she was a manipulator who methodically brainwashed him and turned him against his family. Furthermore, he had suffered from a mental illness that made him pliable in the hands of a cunning criminal. Joseph's aunt confirmed these statements by describing the young man's childhood as very cruel. He was abused by his own mother. In his defense, Joseph stated that he at least killed his victims quickly so they would not suffer. It is noteworthy that he justified the killing of children in a similar way, calling it a kind of mercy. On March 25, 2015, the jury found Joseph guilty on all counts. During sentencing, the defendant continued to portray himself as a victim of manipulation. He even changed his demeanor, which the prosecutor pointed out, warning that Joseph was trying to manipulate the jury's decision by changing his behavior and even his language. The jury was never able to reach a consensus on imposing the death penalty, so Joseph was again sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for each murder. 8 years after the tragedy, in January 2016, Michele Anderson again stood trial. The prosecution again decided not to seek the death penalty. The reason for this was the fact that Joseph had already been sentenced to life imprisonment. State law requires equal treatment for criminals with the same degree of culpability, which was the case for Joseph and his girlfriend Michele. It was decided that it would be inappropriate to demand the death penalty for her. After the verdict, Michele cried and told the court that she felt great remorse and regretted that she could not undo the crime she had committed. The prosecutor insisted that the only reason for such lyrical digressions was the unwillingness to spend the rest of her days behind bars and the hope for an even milder sentence. The prosecution highlighted the fact that Michele mentioned financial motives or anything related to money more than 35 times when she tried to explain the reason for her crazy act. It seemed that the main motive for the crime was money, the inheritance and her parents' house, which she intended to obtain. In her heart, Michele remained the same cruel and bloodthirsty person, and her remorse seemed to be merely a theatrical performance. According to the prosecutor, it is impossible to believe a woman who repeatedly changed her statements and overtly lied. For example, when she accused her family of abuse, no evidence was found during the investigation and questioning of witnesses that such incidents occurred in her life. Michele quite blatantly tried to defame her relatives, as if the murders were not enough, and all this just to make herself look better. New explanations have emerged, with Michele emphasizing that she hated Erica as much as the others, but her feelings were triggered by the feeling that Erica had taken her brother out of her life. However, their relationship was strained, which means she lied again. Ultimately, the probable reason for the young woman's massacre was banal jealousy. In the trial, the jury heard testimony from 38 witnesses called by the prosecution for 5 weeks. It was largely a repetition of Joseph's trial, who was already serving his sentence. The hearing was more of a formal matter. Among the speakers was also Michele's older sister, Mary, who miraculously was not at this celebration. Judy and Wayne had gathered the whole family for Christmas, but Mary had fallen ill shortly before. She later thanked fate that she could not attend for health reasons. At the hearing, she stated that it saved her life. Michele admitted that she had been planning the act against her family for about 2 weeks. The murderers, however, obviously did not shine with intelligence, as they were unable to cover their tracks, dispose of the bodies, or hide the evidence of the crime. The story of getting married in Las Vegas as an alibi, of course, turned out to be a lie and was immediately refuted. Despite tearful confessions, Michele showed her true colors when it turned out that the verdict had become final. Even probation was out of the question. She became hysterical, yelled at the judge, and threatened to sue him for providing her with bad lawyers. The defendant even demanded in writing that she be released from prison and allowed to seek her own private lawyer. Of course, this was denied. Accusations of violating constitutional rights followed, and the target of her wrath was the judge. Meanwhile, both offenders are in state prisons. It was not only an emotionally difficult and lengthy trial, but also an expensive one. Given the numerous appeals and the resistance of the murderers' defense attorneys, the fight to commute the sentence dragged on for years. Even without the money spent directly on the investigations carried out by the sheriff's office and the state crime lab, prosecutors spent approximately $2 million on the case of the 2 criminals. Joseph's defense cost about $5 million, and Michele's trial was even more expensive. The only consolation for the people who paid for the work of law enforcement agencies in the couple's case is the fact that these bloodthirsty criminals will never be free again. If you liked the video, feel free to give it a like. That helps a lot with its spread. Also, leave a comment to support the channel and recommend the video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Thanks for watching and take care.